You refer to a phrase that I've heard often from readers and callers, usually angry readers and callers to me at the Daily News, when they say, Mr. Gonzalez, what part of illegal don't you understand? And you raise the point that the concept of illegality in terms of immigration is actually a relatively new term in American history, and it's also been changed over time, and its use has always been racialized. Could you talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's part of the same system that I was describing before, that restricted immigration to white people and citizenship to white people, and then started to cut off immigration. But as immigration started to be restricted for groups, including Asians, and eventually even for Europeans who were considered to be inferior Europeans, like Southern and Eastern Europeans in the 1920s, Mexican border crossing was never restricted. And Mexican border crossing was never restricted because Mexican labor was so utterly necessary in the southwest of the United States, and because Mexicans were not considered immigrants. So therefore, their immigration did not have to be restricted. They were considered to be workers, legally discriminated against on what were considered racial grounds. That is, they were racially so-called Mexican. That was perfectly legal. To deprive them of citizenship was perfectly legal. And the system worked from the perspective of maintaining the United States as a white country, because unlike the Asians, Mexican migration was generally a circular migration. That is, Mexicans came, worked for a season or a year or a couple of years, and returned to Mexico. So the history of border migrations for 150 years was one of circular migrations that were basically either completely unregulated or, as for example, during 1942 and 1964, extended through 1967, government-sponsored through the Bracero program, but migrations that denied citizenship and denied rights to the Mexicans who were in the country. So the creation of illegality and starting to call this migration illegal happens in 1965, really, when Mexican migration is for the first time considered to be immigration and is legally restricted. That is, a quota is put on Mexican migration, as it is on every country of the world. And in a situation where tens of thousands of Mexicans have been crossing the border legally and recruited and sometimes even coerced every year, all of a sudden this is made illegal. It's not stopped, but it's given a different name. Instead of calling it the Bracero program, it's called illegal migration. It's still just as necessary to the economy of the Southwest. It's still encouraged by all different sectors, but the discrimination against these workers is now justified by the introduction of this new terminology and status of illegality.